online Bible study. Here's the reason why we do this. We want to grow together right where we are, right where we are. We want to leverage every bit of everything, technology, in person, all of that stuff to just really declare the gospel, to grow together. So we've been going through the book of Mark every Wednesday at 9 a.m. and we are excited again to dive deeper into this. Where we are in the book of Mark is Mark chapter 5. Last week we talked about the demon named Legion because it was many, and then we're going to continue on into those next passages. But we're going to do something a little bit different today. You know me, I like to throw a curveball. It's just what we do. The next story in the book of Mark chapter 5 is known as the miracle on the way to the miracle, right? There are two miracles that will happen in this next text, and because it's such a long portion of passage, we are actually going to look at one miracle, and then next week we'll look at the other miracle. So if you've got a Bible, open it up to Mark chapter 5. We're going to start in verse 25. This may sound like a familiar text. It's actually an amazing story, but we're going to read verse 25 through 34. And it says, now a woman suffering from bleeding for 12 years had endured much under many doctors. She had spent everything she had and was not helped at all. On the contrary, she became worse. Having heard about Jesus, so she's heard the story, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his clothing. For she said, if I touch his clothes, I will be made well. Instantly her flow of blood ceased, and she sensed in her body that she was healed of her affliction. And at once, I love that, at once Jesus realized in himself that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd, he said, hey, who touched my clothes? His disciples said to him, you see the crowd pressing against you, and yet you say, who touched me? But he was looking around to see who had done this. The woman, with fear and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the truth. And Jesus said this. He said, daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be healed from your affliction. Now, before we start diving into this a little bit more, let me kind of introduce the story that we're going to look at next week. Is after casting the demons into the pigs, there's this religious leader named Jairus. It's weird spelling, so we're just going to go with J, right? So J walks up to Jesus, who also starts with a J, and comes up to him and he tells him that his daughter's really sick. So what's happening is Jesus is on his way to J's, not Jesus, but the other J, daughter, right? He's going to go heal her daughter. Now, as Jesus is passing, this crowd is following him. Everywhere Jesus went, it seems or appears that there was a crowd. Everybody wanted to see what Jesus was going to do, right? They wanted to see what this amazing man who teaches with authority, who casts out demons, who heals, was doing. And on his way, he comes by this woman, right? And here's what we know about this woman. At the beginning of the story, she is nameless. It's really interesting that it will mention Jairus, who was a name. He was a synagogue leader. But this second person mentioned in the story was nameless. And here's what we know. She's had an issue for 12 years, right? She's been bleeding for 12 years. She's exhausted her finances trying to find healing for 12 years. So what we're seeing is she has a medical problem, right? That she's invested all of her resources in. So now she has a financial problem. And if you look at that time period, she actually has a religious problem, right? What's the religious problem? Well, she, by Jewish standard and Jewish law, was ceremonially unclean, right? So if somebody was to walk up to her, she would have to announce, hey, I'm unclean. I'm dirty. Let me make it relevant today. Hey, I've been exposed, right? You know, now that we're in this COVID time period, can you imagine how embarrassing that would be for any person that had any kind of sickness, right? That if anybody, if your loved ones walked up to you and tried to come and see you, you'd have to tell them, hey, I'm unclean. And if they made contact with you, if they barely touched you, they too would be ceremonially unclean. Now, this is what's interesting to me. She invested all of her financial resources in trying to find a healing, and we'll see that later on in the story that it was Jesus that healed her. This is what really shows up to me, and something I think that we need to think, just because of the American dream and how it can conflict with our belief systems, is Jesus will always do more than money ever could, right? Jesus will always do more than money ever could, and especially in our culture and in our place, sometimes the God fighting for the throne, lowercase g God, right? The God fighting for the throne that is supposed to be Jesus in our lives is finances, it's money. Jesus will talk about this. He said you can't serve both God and money. He said you'll love one and you'll hate the other, and sometimes, if I'm going to be completely honest, most of our pursuit is in the pursuit of increase, and not necessarily increase in faith, but sometimes increase in resources. Right? We want more money to buy nicer cars, bigger things, and maybe it's a status thing that we see. We think that if we have nicer things, we have a greater status. But what status would come along with greater faith? I think that would be a greater status. So now that we're on the topic of faith, this woman like literally risked everything, right? This crowd. So Jesus is passing through, and there's this crowd, right? When this in the other gospels, when it talks about this story, it says that this crowd was so tight, as if to crush somebody, right? So there's that many people around Jesus. They're packed in like sardines, right? They're super tight, and this woman like fights her way because she's heard the stories about Jesus. She's heard that he's healed people. She's heard that he teaches with authority. She's heard that he's not like anybody else that's ever walked the earth, and it's so true, right? So she's like, listen, I've exhausted my resources. That didn't fix anything. I've struggled for 12 years, and she's like, if I can just touch him, if the stories are true, if I could just touch Jesus, then I could be healed. Do you see the faith there? Right? It's not that if Jesus would touch me, it's not if I could stop him and get his attention, because if you read the story, that's not what happens. Her response was, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get to him. To get to him. So she pushes through. She violates the Jewish law because she shouldn't have been in the crowd or anywhere near the crowd. She should have been saying that she was unclean. She pushes through and she touches Jesus. And it's really interesting to me that Jesus would recognize that somebody touched him, right? Remember, the crowd is so tight that people are bumping into him. Again, it said that it was so tight that it could have crushed somebody. So Jesus had people bouncing off of him all over the place. But all of a sudden, one lady touches him, and he could tell the difference. It blows my mind, because Jesus can tell when we reach out to him in faith. You know what I mean? Jesus can tell when we're just following along for the show, right? Where we follow along just to see what Jesus can do, or if we're following along because we believe that he is our source, that he is our healer, that he is our provider, that he is our salvation, and all of those other things. So this lady reaches out, Jesus feels it, and he says, hey, who is it that touched me? The disciples are kind of funny. They're like, hey, Jesus, I don't know if you went blind in the last 10 seconds. There's people all around you. How are you going to ask us who bumped into me? Jesus still pursues to look, and she recognizes that Jesus is looking. She falls into a position of worship, fearfully. She falls into this position of worship, and Jesus looks at her, and I just want to reread that again. He says, daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be healed from your affliction. Your faith has saved you. Your faith has saved you. That should ring a bell, because we're not saved by our works. We're saved by grace through what? Through faith, right? Your faith has saved you. I don't know what circumstance. I feel like sometimes we're always in a circumstance, and sometimes we're really good at hiding it. I don't know what circumstance you're in, but I am telling you that if you'll reach out and go for Jesus, that is where the solution is always going to be. And that's what she's seen. Doctors couldn't do it, right? These are paid professionals that's their job, is to figure out a solution. 12 years, no doctor could figure it out. Money couldn't do it, right? Money's not the solution to every problem, and sometimes it is the root of the problem, if we're going to be completely honest. It was Jesus that brought about the healing. And my favorite part about the entire story is, remember at the beginning of this, I said she walked into this story nameless. We don't know who she was. She was a woman with an issue, right? That's how the Bible defined her. But after she had encountered Jesus, after she had touched Jesus, after she had reached out to him in faith, she had a name. It was daughter. It was daughter, right? It is through our faith that we become what? Sons and daughters of God. That's what Romans 8 would tell us, right? So she walked in nameless, but she left with a name. She walked in nameless, but she left with a name. And listen, I just wanted to bring that up, man. If you would come to Jesus, maybe the world tells you that you're nameless, but once you come to Jesus, you have a name. You have an identity. The Bible says that we're seated with him in heavenly places. You have a seat at the table, right? So I love this story because of the great faith, right? The title of this was She Risked Everything, because the truth is she risked everything, right? When she didn't know what to do, she ran to the person who has the answer to every problem, who is the solution to our problems. And through that, it said, hey, your faith has saved you and healed you. And I just want to remind you of the gospel. The gospel is just that, right? That if we believe in our heart, confess with our mouth that Jesus is Lord, that we will be saved. We are saved by grace through faith. And it's actually in the presence of the King of Kings that we find out what our real name is, right? So that is this week's Bible study. I really hope that it encouraged you right where you are. Again, that's our vision, to grow together right where we are. We do this every Wednesday at 9. It live streams on our Facebook page and on our YouTube page. So we'd love for you to join us. If you're watching on YouTube, we'd love for you to subscribe. You'll get a notification every time we're live, or Facebook. We'd love for you to share it, just so that people can hear the message, right? Hear the gospel, hear about this woman's great faith. So I hope you have an amazing week, and we'll see you this weekend.